I want to turn to the budget now, your biennium budget. Your proposal aggressively calls for eliminating the state's deficit by about 90% in just 2 years. Rick, who's from Toma, wants to know, why do you think it needs to be done in just one budget cycle?
Well, because part of the reason we're in this problem is because they would just pass things off to the future. I want to make a commitment to the future so that my kids and the kids of the state aren't faced with even more dire consequences than what we face today. The reason we're here is because previous governors, previous lawmakers failed to make tough decisions and instead said, well, push it off to the future. They raided funds, segregated funds. They went after the tobacco endowment. The last budget, they took $2 billion worth of one-time federal stimulus aid and used it for an ongoing budget. Those are all problems that got us to where we're at today. Passing it on 2 years from now just makes those problems even more difficult in the next budget.
I was just going to follow up. Why not spread the cuts out over 2 budget cycles? That'd still be your 4-year term.
Well, again, because understand that at that point, just by reducing it by 90% doesn't mean your costs don't escalate. 2 years from now, we're going to have other cost drivers. Because we maintain services for needy people in this state, Medicaid is the second largest part of our state budget, but the fastest growing part of our budget. So the aid we provide for our seniors, for needy family and children, that continues to grow, and we don't cut that in this budget. We try and control it, we try to minimize it, but we don't take away those benefits. And so if you don't get this budget under control now, in 2 years when those costs continue to grow, you're going to be in an even bigger pickle than we face right now.
Just some other topics. I want to ask you about the prank phone call. Yeah. Were you embarrassed by that?
Well, I mean, in the end, what I said on that call and any other private calls I made is not unlike what I've said in front of the cameras here. I point out the fact that we couldn't negotiate when it come to collective bargaining because of the cost implications. I was asked about whether or not people, considered riling the crowd up, and we've had ideas brought to us from outside of our office all the time, and I said no.
But were you embarrassed that you were duped?
Oh, sure. I mean, that part's ridiculous. I mean, the fact that I think people point out that even people who don't agree with me on the issues think it was ridiculous what happened. But it's one of those where we had, ultimately, the reason that call got through was after days of people calling. This person who alleged to be someone who was ultimately an employer in this state and wanted to contact us, just like we've talked to other employers and other people. I mean, I talk to people every day. In fact, I just saw an email from someone I'm going to call a little bit later from La Crosse who pointed off he's a laid-off union worker who's ultimately frustrated because here he's had to make sacrifices in the private sector, and he feels it's only right that people in the public sector should as well. But I contacted someone earlier today who emailed me from Madison, who's a state worker, who raised some concerns but ultimately hoped we could get this resolved. We talk to people all the time from all across the state. I get not every email because I've got tens of thousands of emails, but I try to get a sampling every day of the calls and contacts we get.
That's what your staff's for, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, when you've got that many contacts, you got to have plenty of people to help you follow up with them.
You can hear the people in the rotunda. Yeah. You can hear the people outside. Has it gotten to you at all? I mean, have you lost any sleep in the last few weeks?
No. I mean, in the end, and I've said repeatedly, the protesters are here, have every right to be here, and they have every right to be heard. But I'm not going to let thousands of protesters here in the Capitol anyway overpower the voices of the millions of taxpayers in this state who ultimately believe what we're doing is the right thing. They believe that asking public employees, including me, to pay a little bit more for pensions, a little bit more for health care, still much less than what the majority of them are paying across the state, is not an unrealistic request.
Wisconsin's gotten a lot of national attention in the last few weeks. Kathy Krakow wants to know if you have political aspirations beyond Wisconsin.
No, my focus is in getting the two things I promised. I said we've got a crisis in the state that's both fiscal and economic. I started out on day one trying to tackle the economic crisis. We had a very successful first month and a half in office. In fact, a lot of Democrats voted for our jobs bills. We put forward all sorts of things that showed that Wisconsin was open for business. I said the other big crisis we're facing is budgetary. It's fiscal. And I said I would do what it takes to get the state back working again when it came to the state's budget. So for me, I'm focused on this. Now, the one thing that surprised me is I knew without a doubt that anytime you take on the status quo, anytime you're bold in taking on the status quo, you're going to get pushback. So I knew there'd be protesters. I knew there'd be attention. I had no idea that you'd get as many national union bosses that would come into this state all the money that would come in from outside of Wisconsin. That part surprised me. So I guess I didn't see that one coming in terms of the national attention that would create. But long term for us, I think when we move this state forward, we show people that not only can we reform things when it comes to getting our finances in shape, but in doing so, how we make it easier for our local governments and our state government to be more innovative and more creative and to do things that make our government work better for the people that we serve. We do those things, we may very well end up being a national leader, but we've been there before. You know, Tommy Thompson challenged the status quo back at the beginning of his term. When he did so, he helped the people of the state create 258,000 new jobs. In going into his second term, he challenged the status quo on welfare and education reform, and ultimately made Wisconsin a national leader in both of those. We're going to do this because it's the right thing for Wisconsin. If in the end we become a national leader because of reform again, so be it. We've been a leader in plenty of other things before. We can be a leader here too.
One viewer wants to know if you're considering privatizing the state employee pension fund. Is that something that's been talked about?
No.
Just a rumor?
Yep. I mean, the unions out here, the national union leaders that have come in, increasingly, as more and more national government union leaders have come in from outside of Wisconsin, the comments have become more fictitious. They've been based less and less on the truth. And in fact, increasingly, I think that's part of the impact for the millions of dollars that they have dumped on TV. When you even look at some of the polls and people hear collective bargaining and they think it's a right, there's a disconnect from the reality, from the fact, and the fact is what we're asking for state and local workers is more generous than what federal employees get because they don't have collective bargaining for wages and benefits. It's more generous than what many states across the country have. But again, you hear these sorts of rumors and in some cases outright lies because these guys coming in from outside of Wisconsin really don't care about the truth.
Have you spoken with any of the 14 Senate Democrats?
I have, a number of times.
Recently?
I tried to make a call to one of them last night and ended up getting his voicemail. But my administration has been reaching out to them, has worked with Senator Fitzgerald to find a pathway back for them. For all the talk about not willing to work with them, that couldn't be further from the truth. What I've said, though, as I've said to you in this interview, is we're just not willing to sell out those local governments who need the tools to balance their budget.
What about, we'll just end on this, you know, there was a news conference in La Crosse, some of the county officials, and their message that they wanted to send to you today was that they don't need help.
Well, if they've got it handled, and then I'm assuming they're not going to complain about the budget. So I'll take note of that. If La Crosse County thinks they can handle the budget, then I'll expect that there'll be no complaints about the next 2-year budget. Because in the end, everywhere else, local officials are concerned about the reductions that are happening here and across the country, and they understand they need the tools to balance their budget.
Is there anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, you're all set.
Appreciate your time. Thank you, Governor.